My name is Oscar Garcia. I'm the Director of Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning at the Green Climate Fund. And I am delighted to be joined here by my colleagues, Jason Spensley from the GEF, Jacob Topil.
Yes.
Great, from CIF, and Justice Musa from the Adaptation Fund. We're missing Kyung Chul from GCF? No. Well, okay.
The audience.
Right. In any case, we wanted to share with you our experience with measuring climate finance, tracking results, and delivering impact. And we do that really in the spirit of strengthen the transparency by which we report on climate results. We are definitely committed to strengthen our ability to report on results and impact. The work that we are going to share with you today is a collaboration platform that started and was established by the heads of the climate funds at COP25 in Madrid in 2019. Five climate funds were part of this initiative: the Adaptation Fund, the Climate Investment Fund, the Global Environment Facility, the GEF, the Green Climate Fund, the GCF, and the Mitigation Action Facility, MAF. This collaboration has various working groups, and this working group in particular is dealing with indicators, methodologies, and the challenges associated with measuring results and impact on both mitigation, adaptation, and nature-based solutions. Today, we're going to have an overview of a mapping exercise that we have done. A mapping exercise really trying to identify the progress made by each of the funds on measuring their results. The objective of this exercise is to achieve greater coherence and to work towards harmonization. So we are moving towards a harmonization agenda between indicators and methodologies. But we need to recognize that we have different mandates, different differentiated but complementary mandates among the global climate funds. And that is why the process of harmonizing our results has been, I would say, a bit bumpy, right? And if not fragmented. But in any case, we are moving into that direction. Welcome. Yes, please join us. So let me briefly pass the microphone to my colleagues so that they can introduce themselves, because they have been in this collaborative initiative much longer than I. Let me start with Justice.
Thank you very much, Oscar, for the brief introduction. As Oscar already said, my name is Justice Musa. I work for the Adaptation Fund, the resource-based management team, if you like, the portfolio management. So basically, my team is responsible for ensure that there's proper management of the portfolio or the project that has been approved. And for that matter, issues related to indicators and results sit within this particular unit. And that is why I am here today to have a discussion with this competent panel to share the work that we've been doing so far in terms of trying to create one fun indicators, if you like it. How do we harmonize so that we make the process quite easy for implementing entities in terms of not juggling through different kind of indicators. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justice. Jacob.
Hi, my name is Jacob Topel, and I oversee partnerships, fund mobilization strategy for the CIF, the Climate Investment Funds. For those who may not know, we're a $12.5 billion fund that represents actually the largest pot of concessional money that is targeted through the MDBs exclusively. So we work through 6 banks: the World Bank, IFC, Asian Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, African Development Bank, I think I covered them all. And I'm here substituting today for the lead of our monitoring and evaluation team. And I'm really happy to be here to have this exciting discussion on harmonization. I think it's long overdue and is not only in the interests of us achieving global goals, but also most importantly, our partner countries.
Now, Jason.
Thank you, Oscar. My name is Jason Spenceley. I represent the Global Environment Facility, the GEF. The GEF is a family of funds servicing multiple environmental and climate conventions, including the UNFCCC, driving for biodiversity, desertification, and climate action, among other environmental and climate benefits. The GEF is the longest serving multilateral environmental and climate convention, and collectively over the last 30 years of operation, the largest in scale. And this conversation on harmonization of indicators is really key. We're in a situation where each of the funds represented have different ways of measuring and driving towards impact. And that makes things challenging for the world, and especially for countries who urgently need the funds to receive them as effectively, efficiently, and quickly as possible. So we see that this is a game changer. It's well overdue, as Jacob has rightly said, and we're on the path together.
Great. And with that brief introduction, then let me get straight into the matter. This working group, as my colleagues have mentioned, are aiming to not just identify which indicators can be harmonized among ourselves, but also between ourselves and the main accredited entities that implement our projects. In the case of the Green Climate Fund, we have 137 implementing accredited entities. And they make a combination of international accredited entities, which are some of them multilateral development banks, as the ones mentioned by Jacob, and others are regional development banks, as well as national entities. And our interest is really to strengthen that network of national entities implementing climate action with the resources channeled by our funds. But this urgency of reporting and understanding what is the impact that we have with our financing on the ground is increasingly pressuring. And that's why this working group has worked in 3 areas. The first one is on investments made on the adaptation side. On the adaptation side, there are a few key takeaways, and I would like to invite my colleague Justice to drive us through the main key findings of the adaptation indicators and methodologies behind. Justice, please.
Thank you very much, Oscar. Let me also use the opportunity to introduce to you Beraway, the Adaptation Fund. So the Adaptation Fund also sits in the GEF. So we sit in the same building within the World Bank. We work through implementing entities as well. So we have multilateral implementing entity, regional implementing entity, and national implementing entity. The Adaptation Fund indeed is the first entity to test direct access. So we accredit national implementing entity that are able to program with us. But let me start to talk about the key takeaway when it comes to adaptation indicators. Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. That basically means that we need to examine the projects that we are implementing. And of course, one of the major characteristics of climate change is uncertainty. That basically means that once we are designing a project today, sometimes it takes about 3 years, a year or 2 before the project is approved. And sometimes after the project has approved, it takes about a year or 2 before you even start the project. There is possibility that the baselines that underline the various assumptions for the project could have changed within that 5 years lifespan. So the project needs to be evaluated. We need to examine how the project is being implemented so that when there are certain changes, we can use adaptive management process to change this. And that is why we have resource framework. this results framework basically provide some indicators that allow us to be able to track to see how is the project performing. So when we talk about adaptation indicators, basically across all the 4 funds, we try to measure outcomes based on economic outcome, social outcome, environmental outcome, and then governance outcome, if you should allow me to categorize it in that way. Then apart from these outcomes, there are core, items that we looked at. Basically, all of us track the beneficiaries. What are the beneficiaries that are, benefiting from this project? It's something that is across all the 4 funds. We also look at ecosystem restoration across all the 4 funds. So in terms of the unit of analysis, it could differ a little bit. Either we're using kilometers or hectares of land that has been restored. Then early warning system is also one of the dominant issues that we look at across all our resource indicators. But one of the challenge that comes, measuring beneficiaries is, in terms of the unit of analysis, are we able to disaggregate the data based on gender, based on indigenous people, based on, these are some of the issues that are a bit different across the funds in terms of how we do this unit of analysis. But one of the core distinction also across these 4 funds is that the GCF uses a more sector-based approach when it comes to the indicators, meaning that they develop the indicators based on sectors. But the other 3 funds, CIF, GEF, and Adaptation Fund, we are sector agnostic. It means our indicators are based on economic indicators, environmental indicators, market development indicators, policy indicators. So these are the thematic areas or thematic dimensional areas that we use in developing our indicator. By the end of the day, all of us are attempting to track the results or the performance of the project. And that presents a little bit of also challenge to our clients in terms of the same clients we all deal with, but they have to handle different, indicators in terms of reporting. And that is why we are working together under the framework of complementarities and coherence to see whether there is an entry point for us to harmonize these indicators so that it makes life quite easy. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justice, for that brilliant presentation. So if we are measuring impact, we want to see what is the impact on people, right? And that's why we call the number of beneficiaries about our different projects and interventions, but not just on people. We want to see what is the impact that we have on the planet itself. And that's why we really speak about ecosystem and ecosystem management and land under more sustainable management. But that brief presentation of the key takeaways on the adaptation indicators lead us very nicely to some questions that Jason wanted to reflect upon. Jason, please.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like to step back a little bit and look at why we're investing among the funds on common indicator frameworks. It's a big body of work to align this. There's an ongoing working group. It's taking a lot of our time and effort. Why do we think this is important? Because it's really nitty-gritty detail at the end of the day. The reason is that establishing a common indicator framework enables us to speak the same language about what we're driving for, to establish a common compass of what we're driving for in terms of impacts and results. Currently, with each of the funds having different indicator frameworks that don't talk to each other, we're requiring ministries of environment, of finance, of agriculture, and other actors around the world to become specialists in our different indicator frameworks. And it just adds a level of burden and complexity to everyone. Establishing a more common indicator framework enables countries and partners to focus on the important work of implementation and not just understanding our different indicator frameworks, which require, each one is complicated enough if we're frank and honest. Understanding the 4 different ones, especially when we're saying let's do some co-investments in the same project. And can you design an investment that benefits from our different funds? And can you use one fund to leverage funds from another to scale up with another when we have different indicator frameworks? It's almost unmanageable. So we need to have a more common indicator framework so that we're driving collectively to results with a common language, with a common compass. However, the reality is it's easier said than done because each of these funds have been given by this COP somewhat different mandates. Sometimes they're quite different, sometimes subtly different mandates. And that plays out in ways that I think, if we're honest with ourselves, when we entered into this work, in ways that we hadn't quite foreseen. The implication of the mandates for our differing mandates, for the methodologies, for how we results and indicators are measured, and the specifics behind them really play out in different ways. I'd like to give one specific example related to adaptation, land management, and our indicators around land management. We each approach that from slightly different. Land management, one of the most obvious indicator areas. We each approach it from different areas. Some of the funds look at the biodiversity elements. Others look at the ecosystem services that are derived from ecosystems for mitigation and for adaptation. That has implications for the specific indicators and how they're managed. So to bring these together, yeah, there has to be some give and take, and some letting go of and some interpretation of mandates in order to establish a common framework and a common language, recognizing that we each have different mandates and priorities. So that's the process that's ongoing to create this common indicator framework. If we do, our bet is that the funds will be more accessible and we can drive to the quality of climate finance, not just the quantity, but the quality, in a way that's, because impact indicators are basically driving for quality of climate finance, not just quantity. We can drive towards the quality in a more coherent, common, accessible way.
Thank you very much, Jason. That's really encouraging to hear. And I don't think it's a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right? And therefore, we are really working towards that. Jacob, you have been in contact with our counterparts, funding partners who gave us their trust and resources, member states who are really expecting the climate funds to deliver impact quickly. What can you tell us about really how this initiative is appreciated from their perspective moving forward?
Sure. Thank you. And, once again, for those who don't know us, and you heard a lot of comments about of working within the UNFCCC framework. So of the four, we're the one mechanism that is not an official UNFCCC mechanism. We work outside of the framework. That said, our fund supports the Paris Agreement, and every single one of our implementers, which I think is the most important, are Paris aligned or en route to becoming Paris aligned by the end of this year. Those are good questions. It's clear that the objectives of our funds and our programs are very much aligned, right? And they overlap heavily. And there's an upward link there to the climate goals, the global goals, as well as to our downwards to our country partners and to communities that are affected, and also outwards to all the other climate stakeholders affected by our work. The CIF and the funds are by finding a set of common and congruent indicators, this would help us tremendously. It would allow us to situate ourselves amongst all the funds and better understand and shape our targeted outcomes, understand their impact at volume and at depth, right? This would help us on the implementation side as we deal with our partners, but actually just as importantly, it'll help us understand what's happening with the other funds and what they're able to achieve and to learn from them. That'll also help us to find more easily points of collaboration and find out and identify areas that are not getting covered and need more assistance. Now, all of that is useful in terms of informing upstream decision-making as a collective and individually, but also more downstream towards what's in this for the actual beneficiaries who are suffering and are most in need. Now, finally, for communities and our partner countries, having this a unified set of indicators would finally allow us to be in a position where we're comparing apples to apples and have a data-driven foundation that can inform transparency, accountability, and help us link what we're doing to what's happening on the world stage, so that folks on the outside who don't understand this alphabet soup of climate funds can sort of correlate and triangulate what our work means and why we even exist.
Thank you. Very well said, indeed. And I'm glad that you mentioned transparency and accountability, because transparency and accountability is twofold, right? Not just towards the governments that provide us the funds to deliver climate impact and results, but also towards the people in the countries that are receiving these funds, right? Justice, would you like to comment on this relationship with our stakeholders?
Thanks very much. So I'll just pick it up from where CIF colleague ended and where you also continued in terms of the transparency and accountability. So this harmonization or the learning process we're doing now, I'll look at it from both internal benefits and then external benefits. The external is that the next COP 30, will be a big milestone where we'll be assessing the progress of the Paris Agreement. Once we have common indicators, it allows us to be able to identify evidence of impact of the projects that we are doing. That will contribute to, assessment of the progress we've made towards achieving the Paris Agreement, and of course, the second global stocktake. In terms of also external benefits, once we are able to have common indicators, our common unit of analysis, it makes easy for us to be able to report, and that really contributes to issues of transparency. Because right now, if CIF is having different unit of analysis for greenhouse gas emission reduction and GCF is having different, it makes it difficult to really report what is really transparent, what is really happening on the ground. So this process is really allowing us to be able to move to that point where we can have a common data framework, we can be able to report and contribute to external activity that is taking place within the UNFCCC process. Internally as well, we really want to see how our projects are performing and what are the challenges coming up. And there are some of the indicators, as my colleague said, it's quite difficult to collect data on. For example, we have an indicator on income. And for about 10 years now, it's difficult to really get data on how our project is contributing to income, because for the economists there, you understand that there is a lot of confounders if you really want to say that your project is really contributing to income. So we can learn from colleagues and see, in terms of economic outcomes, what are the best units that we can use to be able to attract some of these things. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Justice. I think you get the picture clear, right? You know now why we want to harmonize our indicators and methodologies for calculating the results behind those indicators. So why didn't we do it before, right? It's the obvious question. I mean, it's something so necessary. Let me then ask Jason, which were the challenges that we have identified in the way of doing that?
So, maybe I go to this one. So why didn't we do it before? Okay, fund secretariats don't create themselves. right? Funds don't create themselves. They're created by intergovernmental bodies. They're created by processes emerging by governmental leadership, and they respond to those mandates. When the funds are created, they're given very specific mandates, which then imply different indicator frameworks. Some of the funds were created 30 years ago. Other funds were created a handful of years ago. New funds are being created. Every time a new fund is created, new indicator frameworks are created because they're all driving for impact, and the articulation of what that compass is then established. And so new fund is created, then a whole other level of aligning indicator frameworks to the extent possible. We shouldn't be naive. These funds have different mandates. That they're not the same funds. They're not achieving all the same purposes. That's why they're created. The loss and damage fund will have its own impact indicators. How do we align behind them? To what extent can we? They're not simple questions. So if we take, for example, hectares related indicators, each fund has different mandates for area-based results. Some are driving to mitigation, some are driving to adaptation, some have more ecosystem health and biodiversity dimensions or land degradation dimensions. Some have greater mandate towards livelihoods and sustainable livelihoods. So the different establishment of the indicators and the methodologies behind them it's not trivial to align them. Also, another challenge is the ability to create context-specific indicators. Take climate adaptation, for example. We appreciate that climate adaptation is very localized. Designing for climate, the climate impacts are felt differently from one area to the next, and is experienced by different individuals in the same ecosystem in the same area differently. Establishing indicators, sometimes having global indicators over whole portfolios of investment for adaptation is challenging, and having some flexibility to enable locally specific or context specific indicators is useful for a project. How do we compare those between, let alone from one project to another within a fund, but between funds, those being context-specific indicators? These are some of the challenges we're grappling with and trying to overcome. So we can have common frameworks for considering, for example, context-specific indicators. One more challenge I'd like to address. There's indicators around impact. What about indicators around efficiency and effectiveness? We all appreciate that multilateral climate funds need to be more efficient, need to get funds on the ground faster, easier. We need our partners who are implementing to focus on implementation and not just running around trying to get the funds and understand our indicator frameworks, but actually use the funds for action quickly. So what about indicators frameworks around efficiency and speed, and using similar indicators across the fund so we can talk to each other about our efficiency and speed, a whole other dimension. Now that's not simple as well, because that opens up all sorts of considerations, but it's also another important indicator area. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jason. I think that really is a good segue to invite you to participate with your questions, right? Because now you see exactly what is the situation. So please, if you can please identify yourself.
Hello, everyone. I want to congratulate the panelists. I'm Barbara from the Center of Management and Strategic Studies from Brazil. And this year, in the beginning of the year, we tried to map energy projects that were funded by your funds, actually. So we had a database. We collected data from one database, a very good one. And we started, one of our objectives was to identify how the impact of this project. So it was a very difficult task, and actually we didn't have the answers that we wanted. And I know that you're on a very challenge way, and it's good to hear that you have a working group working on that, on finding and harmonizing indicators. And one of my questions is about um, how are you measuring technology transfer in projects that you are doing? Like, it is very important now. Everyone talks about technology transfer, and we know that this is very important to like push climate change and to make actions forward. So I want to hear a little bit about how you're measuring that and how you plan to harmonize that in your within your funds.
Excellent. Jacob, do you want to?
I can start. First of all, thanks for the question. For the CIF, again, which is a bit different from the UNFCCC mechanisms, what we do is try, in fact, I'm glad you asked about clean tech or technology and technology uptake, because in fact, that's our very raison d'etre. It's to push technology that's not quite commercial grade and that doesn't yet have an established market. So by de-risking these efforts, whether it be because of the recipient country or the type of technology itself, we try and enhance the ambition of the development banks. Let me give you an example. In Brazil, in fact, in Pecém, the port of Pecém, last year, one of the programs of the CIF is in fact target the banks want to go, but don't go because of that risk element. So what does that mean? We've all known that the dirtiest fossil fuel forever has been coal. But ask yourselves, why are the development banks, why haven't they been doing anything on coal abatement? In 2021, the CIF launched the first global coal transition program. Then, at the same time, as a part of a Just Transitions package, we launched a renewable energy, not generation, integration program. How do you get that RE into the grid systems and store it? So a battery storage program accompanied it. These elements are all in fact in play right now in Pecém. It's early. We transferred over to the Brazilian government a $70 million pot of concessional, but for that tiny concessional money, the leveraging effect is something like 1 to over 100. So it's incredible return. The results are still yet to come through. Most recently, though, our CEO visited the Port of Pecém just actually in August with the governor of the district and actually a visiting minister from the UK, Honorable Ed Miliband, to celebrate this excellent work in Pecém in Brazil. We're also doing that same work in nature-based solutions, but I feel like I've been over talking here. I'm happy to speak to you afterwards about how that works and technology transfer.
Very much. Would you like to respond to that question?
Thanks, Barbara, for the question. I will look at it from a broader perspective in terms of measuring impact. Then I'll narrow down to in terms of how do we measure technology transfer. So this is a development field. So if it's quite difficult to really measure impact. So the assumption is that we look at output, outcome, then the last part, which is the impact, which happened maybe 5 years after the project has closed. So at the fund level, we often ends at outcome. But when we hold all other factors constant, the assumption is that once we measure the output and the outcome, if things doesn't change, then of course we'll get the impact that we are expecting. But working in an institution like yours, of course, you take further steps to really measure impact after 10 years, 6 years to see whether this project has really achieved the impact. But specifically to the technological transfer, in our resource framework, we have indicators for capacity building. So for example, if there is a new technology, how many people have you trained? So technological transfer shouldn't be beyond only borders. Also, it could be within the same municipality, within the same country, but is there South-South learning that is taking place? So if you're able to report that this project, you train people beyond the project beneficiary community, you are able to also develop knowledge products, and this knowledge project can now be accessible and people can use it, then these become various output indicators that we can use to measure as a basis for technological transfer. Over.
Any other questions from the audience, please? Thank you, Barbara. Yes, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. My name is Pooja Sahani. I work with Habitat for Humanity as the Global Director for Climate Change. Very interesting conversation here. Thank you so much for that. Something we grapple with as an organization is how do we measure our impact? Just following on what you said, and impact happens a lot later. As an organization, we thought it's important for us to measure our impact, and we came up with 120 indicators. Asking every project to measure 120 indicators is an impossibility. So I'm just wondering, now we are talking about having common indicators across, the major funds here. Is there any prioritization amongst the priorities? It's always a challenge. And if there are some, thinking along that line, what are some of the criteria that you have in mind to prioritize amongst priorities? Have we gone to that extent, or is it still in very early stages, or has there been some thought into how do you prioritize then amongst everything that is really a priority? So thank you. It's a difficult question, but appreciate some insight. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that question, which is indeed very important. How do we prioritize those indicators? In the Green Climate Fund, we have kind of a pyramid structure, right? In which at the top of the pyramid for the mitigation dimension, we have greenhouse gas emission reduction, because we think that that is an indicator that really summarizes and synthesizes the various efforts that are being done at technology levels to reduce carbon emission. And therefore, that's kind of a tip of the pyramid indicator. But below that, there are various other important indicators. If you speak about the energy sector in terms of the capacity of renewable energy, in terms of megawatts installed, the new connections provided, and the access to affordable, reliable, quality energy for development, right? And so, but on the adaptation side, is again, on the top of the pyramid, we have the people reached, right? The beneficiaries that are benefiting from sustainable practices. And on the nature side, we have really alignment on using indicators related to land, biodiversity, and ecosystem management to see the extent to which this ecosystem are sustainably managed. So you are absolutely right that we cannot move forward with 120 indicators for a project, right? And so the right selection of indicators is something that is important to us as well, to really have the pertinent indicators by type of intervention. And within that, create this framework that make our results comparable in the ability to produce those impact much faster. But I really appreciate your participation in this debate, because on top of the discussion about the financing, the discussion should shift more towards the impact of that financing. And it is really this participation in the, how do we harmonize about indicators and measurement that we can move the agenda forward. But Jason, you wanted to comment on.
So I'll add, Pooja, your reflections are always very practical. So this is a very practical approach. If we take adaptation, for example, in the GEF, we have a total of about 45 different indicators that each project, that are a menu of indicators that each project can report on, not required to report on all of them, But to be more manageable, we've divided them into what we call core indicators. So there are 5 core indicators that every project has to report on. And then under each core indicator, a series of sub indicators, similar to the pyramid approach. So for example, core indicator number 1 is on a number of beneficiaries whose lives are more resilient thanks to the project, and that has a whole series of sub indicators. So we don't have one pyramid. So you can imagine, play this out how we're trying to align. We don't have one ultimate top of the pyramid. We have 5. So can we identify one of our 5 that can align with yours, or are we just aligning some of the language? But having some sort of a pyramid approach or core sub indicators, whether it's 3 tiers or 2 tiers, which is part of the debate, is I think necessary. The other is